We begin by placing Moses within the sweeping currents of ancient history and the living faiths that still turn to his story. Moses is not just a single man in a distant past. He is a pivotal figure at the intersection of history, religion, and cultural identity. Historically, his life is framed by the world of late Bronze Age Egypt and the surrounding Near East, an era of powerful pharaohs, imperial administration, and complex social hierarchies. Religiously, Moses anchors three major traditions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, each of which regards him as prophet, lawgiver, or covenant mediator. This dual framing helps us hear his life as both a record of events and as a narrative that has shaped law, morality, and communal memory for millennia. Defining Moses begins with the core facts shared across sources. A Hebrew child raised in the Egyptian royal household, who later leads his people out of bondage and receives divine laws on Mount Sinai. That definition opens into significance. In Jewish tradition, Moses is the ultimate prophet and the giver of Torah, whose leadership establishes Israel's covenantal identity. In Christian thought, Moses prefigures Christ, lawgiver and deliverer, and his encounter with God on Sinai is often read typologically. In Islam, Musa is a major prophet whose trials and revelations teach faith, patience, and obedience. These religious roles demonstrate why Moses' narrative is more than biography. It is foundational scripture, ethical instruction, and communal origin story. Concrete examples illustrate this scope. First, the Exodus narrative has shaped legal and liberation movements. Biblical motifs inspired speeches by leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr., who invoked the Exodus as a metaphor for freedom. Second, the Sinai episode influenced legal codification. Ten Commandments imagery appears in legal institutions, art, and public monuments, evidencing its cultural reach. Scholars and theologians debate historicity and interpretation, offering alternative viewpoints. Some archaeologists question the historical scale of the Exodus, suggesting gradual emergence of Israel and Canaan. Others defend a core historical kernel embedded in oral memory. These debates matter because they affect how we read the text: literal history, theological myth, or a blended memory. Finally, this introduction connects directly to the rest of Moses' story. His upbringing in Egypt explains his unique position between two cultures. The Exodus frames his role as leader. Sinai crystallizes his legacy as lawgiver. Understanding this context lets us follow each dramatic episode with informed attention to its historical plausibility, religious meaning, and enduring impact. When we begin at the very beginning of Moses' story, we meet a child born into danger and destiny. The Israelites were living in Egypt under harsh conditions, their numbers swelling and provoking fear in Pharaoh. Newborn Hebrew boys were threatened with death, ordered to be cast into the Nile. In this fraught moment, Moses' mother makes a decisive, desperate choice. She hides him for 3 months, then places him in a waterproofed basket and sets it among the reeds of the river. That image, an infant cradled on the water, captures both human vulnerability and a calculated act of hope. It's the first turning point, a life saved by a combination of maternal love, courage, and cunning. The princess of Egypt discovers the basket and, moved by compassion, adopts the child. The text says she recognizes him as a Hebrew. Whether moved by pity, curiosity, or political nuance, she names him Moses, drawn out of the water. This adoption places Moses in the Egyptian royal household, transforming his circumstances overnight. He grows up with privileges and education reserved for royalty, language, courtly manners, exposure to religious and political life in one of the ancient world's great civilizations. His early upbringing would have given him knowledge of Egyptian law, diplomacy, and military organization skills that later shape his leadership. At the same time, Moses' identity is complicated. His biological mother, through an arrangement, nurses him during infancy, ensuring that his Hebrew roots remain alive, even as he is raised as Egyptian royalty. This duality, Hebrew by birth, Egyptian by upbringing, creates an inner tension that defines his character. It helps explain his later empathy for his people and his understanding of Egypt from within. Real-world parallels appear in many historical figures raised between cultures: diplomats, interpreters, and leaders who bridge worlds because they know both intimately. There are debates among scholars about historical details and what aspects are theological narrative versus documentary history. Some challenge literal readings and emphasize symbolic meanings: survival amid oppression, the reversal of fortunes, and the molding of a leader by unexpected circumstances. Yet regardless of interpretation, this early chapter connects directly to Moses' later choices: his defense of a Hebrew slave, his flight, and his eventual role in confronting Egyptian power. The image of the basket on the Nile, the royal court, and the secret nursing tie together fate, identity, and preparation for the monumental tasks ahead. Moses' story turns abruptly from privilege to peril in what we call his calling crisis, a pivotal arc that reshapes his identity. Born a Hebrew but raised as an Egyptian prince, he once stood between two worlds. The defining moment comes when he intervenes to stop an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. He kills the Egyptian, burying the body in the sand, an impulsive act of justice that exposes the deep, dangerous fissures between the peoples he embodies. When word spreads, Moses realizes his deed has been discovered. Suddenly, the palace corridors that sheltered him become threats. This is his crisis. He must flee not only punishment, but the life he has known. The significance of this episode lies in its transformation of Moses from privileged insider to marginalized exile. It severs his royal certainty and forces him into empathy with the oppressed. It's also the narrative hinge that prepares him for a calling far greater than princely power: leadership of a people. The flight to Midian serves as both physical escape and moral recalibration. In Midian, he moves from active violence to reflective withdrawal, learning patience and humility, qualities essential for the future lawgiver. Two clear examples underscore this turning point. First, Moses' encounter at the well in Midian. He defends Jethro's daughters from hostile shepherds, drawing on the same courage that got him into trouble in Egypt, but now channeled to protect rather than to avenge. This act leads to his marriage to Zipporah, and integration into a foreign, nomadic household. Second, his role as shepherd for Jethro teaches practical virtues: tending flocks, long hours of solitary reflection, intimate dependence on God's timing, that shape his later leadership style and capacity for endurance during the Exodus. Opinions among scholars vary. Some see the flight as divine providence steering Moses toward maturity. Others view it as exile-induced humility necessary for genuine empathy. Critics argue the initial killing complicates Moses' moral standing. Supporters counter that it reveals a deep commitment to justice, albeit imperfectly expressed. Challenges in this phase include cultural displacement, redefining identity away from royal privilege, and learning to lead without institutions or armies. These tensions link directly to later episodes. The sense of exile grounds Moses' identification with the enslaved Israelites. His Midianite experiences inform his mediation skills and patience on Sinai, and his tested character underpins his ability to confront Pharaoh. In short, flight and Midian are not detours, but crucibles forming the leader who will return to face Egypt and receive the law. We shift now to a moment that changes everything. Moses tending sheep on the far side of the desert when he encounters a burning bush that is not consumed. This is not merely a striking image, it's a divine commission. God speaks from the flame, identifies himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and reveals Moses' true calling. In plain terms, Moses is told to stop hiding in exile and to lead his people, the Israelites, out of slavery. The scene defines the concept of vocation in the story, a private, unexpected encounter that propels an ordinary life into history. The significance is immense. This is where leadership is reframed from royal privilege to covenant responsibility. Moses, once a prince of Egypt and now a shepherd, is summoned to represent God before another ruler, Pharaoh. The commission explains the moral stakes. God promises liberation, justice, and a promise-keeping return to the land of the ancestors. This moment establishes Moses not as a political insurgent, but as an emissary with divine authority, which will shape every subsequent confrontation. Concrete examples underscore how the commission plays out. First, God provides signs to authenticate Moses' mission. His staff becomes a serpent, and his hand leprous, and then healed. These signs function like credentials, intended to persuade both the Israelites and Pharaoh that Moses speaks with God's backing. Second, God anticipates resistance by promising accompaniment. I will be with you. That assurance turns an impossible task into one with divine presence at its core. Voices from tradition amplify the drama. Jewish and Christian interpreters have long seen the burning bush as symbolizing God's immanence without consumption, holiness that transforms but does not annihilate. Liberational theologians emphasize the bush as a call to confront oppression directly. Yet there are counterpoints. Some historians question the historicity of a single prophetic encounter, viewing the story as a theological charter rather than literal biography. Challenges emerge immediately in the narrative. Moses resists, saying, "Who am I?" and later voicing doubts about his speech. God counters by appointing Aaron as spokesman, highlighting collaboration rather than solitary heroism. The clash with Pharaoh that follows connects back to Moses' Egyptian upbringing. He must face the court and its political power, leveraging the divine signs against entrenched human authority. This commission thus ties together upbringing, identity, and mission. It turns a shepherd into a leader, links covenant promises to public confrontation, and sets the stage for the epic struggle that becomes the Exodus and the giving of the law.